My name is Colleen Kelly Poplin, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. And I do a wide variety of things, but primarily I'm a documentary filmmaker and educator. I make films about gender, religion, family, all the ways those things intersect. And I teach at Emerson College a variety of things: documentary production, feminist media production, and a class called Race and Gender in Contemporary Hollywood.
Awesome, thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you first got started in this industry?
Sure. So, interestingly enough, I actually started college intending to be a neuropsychiatrist. So, I was on a pre med path, and I was in pre medicine at UT Austin in Austin, Texas. And I was sitting in an organic chemistry class one day, and I was like, I don't care. And I literally walked out and I dropped the class and I looked at all the majors at UT, and it's a huge public institution, so there's a million. I was like, the only thing that really gets my juices flowing is radio, television, and film. And that seems a ridiculous major to have. This was in 2004, 2003 or 2004. And it's like, that seems ridiculous, but I'm just going to do it. I went to my advisor and she was like, ooh, it's really hard to get into radio, television, and film here because it's a small program. And I was like, whatever, what do I have to do? So I just did what I had to do. I got in. And then when I graduated, there were no jobs in my field, in my area. And I told myself, okay, well, I can either bite the bullet now and work outside of my field, just be like, I have to have money and I'm going to stay here. Or I can say, I will live wherever I need to live as long as I'm working in my field, because I felt like if I started out of it, I just would always be out of it. And then what's the point? And so I looked all over the world, literally, and I found a position teaching media production to youth. It was like a youth production thing. And it was a nonprofit record label that that basically taught kids how to make hip hop. I was like, this white Texas girl be like, oh yeah, I'll teach how to make hip hop. So that's what brought me to Boston. And because I just said, like I said, I'm going to move wherever to have a field that's related to mine. And I did sound design in undergrad. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So I moved to Boston. I literally sent all packages. I packed up all my stuff and I just shipped them to a stranger because I'm a maniac. Could have gone really wrong, but I'm happy to say it went right. And then I just arrived on a plane and all of my stuff was still there. Moved in with a girl and her family from Colombia. They had immigrated to the United States from Colombia kind of recently. And so I moved to this place. They all spoke Spanish and I'm just like in this little room. So it was a little crazy, but I successfully was working in my field out of college. And since then, I've just been kind of doing that, following my gut and figuring out like where the place is for me. And then I moved from sound design to documentary film probably 3-4 years after that, as I got more and more proficient with a camera. So technology is going crazy now. Our phones are better cameras than what I worked on that cost like $5,000 in college, but then it was very hard to use a professional camera, but I was getting better and better. And then I switched to documentary film, and then I did grad school and stuff that has led to me being here.
That's super awesome. What kind of led you to want to further educate yourself, like go further down that career, or to educate yourself more in that field?
Like to go to grad school and stuff? That's a great question. So the thing with my field, right, and our field, now that as I get to know more about you, is there are multiple ways to go about it. There's getting educated in it, there's educating yourself in it, so kind of being autodidactic. And depending on what you go into, some of those work and some of them don't. Sometimes you have to have both. And what I found is what was best for me was a formal education in it, so that I could sell that for employment. I find that when you don't have an education, even if you have the skills, more and more people have educations, and a bachelor's degree is almost kind of becoming the new high school, in that if you don't have a bachelor's degree, people just kind of take you out of the pile of resumes. And it's totally unfair, and it's totally gross and totally elitist. But more and more, that's sort of the first cutoff. You know, even if your bachelor's has nothing to do with the job that you're applying for, there's employers are sort of seeing it as the baseline. And so because of that, I found that even kind of low tier jobs are now saying master's preferred, which is crazy. I'm like, I need a master's degree to be an administrative associate at your office. Okay. But, you know, depending on if you live in a big city or kind of where you live, there's a big range of educations required. And it's not for, honestly, any other reason other than a way for people to filter in candidates, which I think is gross, but is the reality of the situation. So I had my bachelor's. I wanted to work in my field. I felt like I was already reaching like the upper cap of what I could do. And then I found out through a friend that if you worked at Emerson, and this is true for a lot of colleges, this is actually a great way to finance graduate school for anyone who is wanting to go that route, is to get a full-time job at a college that you want to attend, even if it's unrelated, and then use that job to pay for your school. So at Emerson, there's a benefit if you're full-time employed there to go to graduate school for free. You just pay taxes on it. And Emerson, for anyone who doesn't know, Emerson is known as one of the top media schools. And I wanted to go there. There's no way I could afford it. I grew up very poor. And just no chance could I afford graduate school unless I was going to be in debt forever, which I didn't want to be. I already have enough debt from undergrad. And so I, much like college, I said, okay, well, I'm just going to apply to every single random ass job and just see what I get, and then use that to pay for my school. So, and the reason I decided to go to school for higher education was because I did audio in undergrad, and I felt like I could use more training in image and camera and that sort of thing. And B, I was starting to see that I needed to be set apart yet further, that my bachelor's wasn't enough in a town like Boston. And so I decided to do that. I got a job as an administrative assistant for the journalism department, and then I used that to pay for my master's degree. Then I got a job in the visual and media arts department at Emerson, and lo and behold, I realized, you know what? I loved teaching production to those youth. I want to teach at the college level, and wah, 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 you can't teach at the college level unless you have an MFA or PhD. And so I was like, well, crap, what can I do? Then, miraculously, Emerson turned their master's, just their Master of Arts program, into an MFA program. And since I graduated recently with my MA from that program, I had 5 years, if I wanted to, go back to school again to get the MFA, really put the F in my MA. It's very frustrating. But I knew I just had to do it and to seize that opportunity. And so I did. Finally got the MFA, finally started teaching. And throughout all of that, I used any stores of energy I had left to make creative work. It's really just circumstances, you know, like I think with education, it's not always, I probably shouldn't be saying this considering I'm an educator. But I think with education, it's not always required to get where you need to go. But sometimes it's the only gateway, especially if you don't have connections otherwise, because you have to look so far beyond like the typical candidate to get attention when, you know, fields are overrun with people. Education is not the only way to do that, certainly. A really strong creative reel, connections, etc. But it's just kind of figuring out what tools you need and what tools you could possibly use, and put them in your tool belt and just do it, and accepting the things that you don't have, like connections and money in my case.
You had talked about finding like any stores of energy that you had to continue creating. What type of work did you create during those times, and how did you find the energy to do it while doing so much?
I had a baby in there somewhere too, so that's a little bonus. So yeah, you know, I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't know. I do know the kind of work I made. I don't know how I got the energy for it, other than it's what drove me to do all that ridiculousness anyways, you know? So like, if you're a storyteller, you want to be making stories, and there's so many things that we have to do. You want to be telling stories, you want to be telling your story, you want to be telling other people's stories. You just have a drive to do that, and everything else, you know, going to school, working, trying to make money, all this stuff are all the peripheral things that allow you to be a storyteller, you know? And so I had to finance it some way. I had to do this, whatever. So all those things were there, certainly, but I had to keep my focus on the reason I was doing all of this nonsense, is so that I would have the path to tell the stories I wanted to do. So during the time when I was busiest, I really got interested in archival footage and making films that were like collage pieces, or more like editing exercises from material that I didn't shoot myself, because production, it basically just cut out a production step. If I had video that I had access to, instead of me having to go shoot, I was like, okay, well, I can just get all this and make something of it without the stress of going to shoot and setting up interviews. And as you know, it's a challenge. Without producing all that stuff, I can just make something. And so one of my favorite pieces from this time, and one of the pieces that did the best, you know, as far as festivals and views and all that stuff, is a piece called The Privileges and Responsibilities of Sisters, which is, so I grew up Mormon, and I have since left the church, but there is twice a year, there's a conference called General Conference, and it's where all the leaders of the church, old white dudes, come together and speak to the church. So it's a global event. And the amazing thing is that they have recorded and archived all of those meetings back to the 60s. And it's all online and available to members. Maybe after I say this, it won't be, I don't know. But it's all available. And available for download, everything. And so based on fair use principles, I was able to use that and cut it to a new piece. And so I basically read and researched all of the talks that had anything to say about women or mothers or, you know, modesty, sexuality, chastity, anything like that. I did like ass loads of keyword searches and just got hundreds of talks. And then I did a paper edit of all those talks and highlighted on actual paper, reading text, the things that were the most egregious to me, downloaded all the videos, and just started slogging through this. And then the end result was a 5.5 minute piece that feels like one talk, but it's all these different men saying all these horrific things about women. Like, we should be staying at home, and we may be really smart, but we should be using our smarts for our homes and not for the world, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that piece, I'll share that with you, or you could link to it or whatever you'd like to do. But that piece, I posted it online, and I think it was 48 hours or 72 hours. It had 12,000 views. It's crazy. And which does not compare to like a music video coming out, but for like a random indie film person, I was losing my mind. And then it's played in a bunch of festivals too. And I think as you're making work that you want to be powerful, the shorter the better, because it's really easy for those things to be pulled into film festivals, because filmmaker or film festivals will be like, oh, we have like a 5-minute pocket, we have a 2-minute pocket. So like if you have like a powerful thing that's short, it actually is way more successful in the festival circuit than a longer thing. So I just made things like that. I got really enthusiastic about these short, powerful pieces. And pretty much everything I made during that period is under 10 minutes. The longest is like 10 minutes, 11 seconds or something like that. Because in that period, I knew that I had to just keep making, just so I didn't lose my connection to what I loved. And so I just forced myself to keep doing it. And so I modified myself. It's like I talked about, like having all the tools in your tool belt, figuring out which ones are yours to do. It was only realistic for me to make these short little things so that I could feel a sense of accomplishment, even if it's just a 2-minute, 3-minute thing. And so with archival footage and giving myself a shorter time format, I was able to, make, handful of films, even when I felt like I was losing my mind, which I think is important. I still lost my mind, unfortunately. But, it's vaguely there still.
So I actually did have a chance to check out that film. I had looked into your bio and I
Okay,
saw that you had made those. And so I looked at that and I actually wanted to ask you a few questions about that.
sure,
I also kind of wanted to ask you if you're comfortable about like your journey from leaving the Mormon church, because I did read about that also.
sure,
Just kind of what that process was kind of like and why you made the decision to do that.
yeah. Oh, do you want me to start there about leaving the church? Okay. Okay. So I come from a Mormon family back to when the Mormon church started. So on both sides, both my mother and my father were Mormon, grandparents were Mormon, all the way back to the dawn of Mormonism, which it's a very contemporary religion, all told. It's about early 1800s. So it's a very big deal that my family is Mormon, because in the faith, one of the primary tenets is that if you're Mormon and you get married in the temple, it's called, then you are together forever. You're sealed for time and all eternity, it's called. And while that's a lovely idea, it leads then that if you do not get married in the temple, you are not together forever, which is a very horrific idea, to teach that everyone who's not Mormon isn't going to be together forever. It's kind of a crazy idea. But anyway, I'll swing back to that in a moment. So I grew up Mormon. I had a reasonably happy-ish childhood. My parents divorced when I was 8. And I went with my mom, and my older sibling stayed with my dad, which is very unusual. Usually they try to keep the kids together. And I grew up Mormon. I went to church every single day, except for Saturdays. All through high school, you go to something called seminary, which is at 6 a.m. So I would get up and get ready and go to church at like 5:45, 6 a.m. and then have church and then go to high school. And it's horrible. But that's just the Mormon way. So I went to church every day except for Saturdays. And I went through all of that. And I remember my brothers. I have two older brothers and an older sister. I'm the baby of four. And I remember my brothers talking to me, and they said to me, your political beliefs and your progressive values and, all that, you're really feminist kind of naturally. I've always kind of been the type of person I am. They said it just doesn't work with the church. And I fought that so bad because I believed in the church. It's all I'd ever known. And I couldn't accept that the church couldn't change to be more supportive of women. Like, I just couldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it. And I grew up and I committed myself to leadership roles with young women. So like youth, the, female youth, I would be like in their programming. It's called Young Women's, but basically it's like, like a typical church, like youth program. And I would do the leadership there. I made a bunch of relationships with them. I was a leader in the women's organization of the church. It's called Relief Society. I was in the choir. I was fully dedicated to the church. And I really felt in my heart that I could change it, that I could make it something that was more, that was more conducive to females and good for females. It's a very patriarchal religion, but I had faith that it could change. And really, with the piece that I was talking about, what's funny about that is I was a young women's leader when I made that. And I didn't even think about how weird that sounds. I mean, because it's pretty critical of the church, but it's using their words. I didn't change their words at all. And it's weird to me now to think that I was an active, practicing Mormon person when I made that. But it was me like giving myself to the creative experience, and what I made reflected back to me. I realized, oh, like this probably isn't the best. And that kind of got me thinking like, ooh, how do you undo years and years and years of patriarchy and really harmful visions of women? How do you undo that? And the weight just felt heavier and heavier, but I soldiered on. I was committed. I always have been. I'm very stubborn in that way. But then I had a daughter, and I found out I got pregnant. And when I was pregnant, I realized I probably should not continue with the Mormon church for the sake of my kid. And then I found out that my unborn child was going to be a daughter. And it was the nail in the coffin, so to speak. I was like, I can't have my daughter hear that she is anything less than amazing, that she's anything less than the man right next to her. Like, I just can't have her hear that. And so I knew then that despite being very active, despite my family back generations, despite all of this, like, I just couldn't be Mormon. And so it was painful and horrible, weeping and gnashing of teeth. But I left and took my name off the records when I was pregnant. And so, yeah, my girl is 4 now, and she knows nothing but that she's amazing. So that's how I hope it always stays. We'll see.
That's a really powerful story, and I can see how it kind of plays into who you are today. And I kind of wanted to ask, like, how do you feel like that experience and your childhood overall impacted who you are today now?
Yeah, so Okay. So as a child, um, I was always creative. I was always making things. I would, steal my mom's Garth Brooks tapes and like cover the cassette tape thing so I could record over it and make my own talk shows on my like Fisher Price thing. I always say that in my bio because I remember distinctly like making these talk shows. Um, so I've always kind of had the desire to tell stories without realizing that that was even a possible career choice. Um, and then a lot of things happened that changed who I am and how I see the world. So one, hearing that the way I see the world isn't compatible with my faith got me kind of feeling strange, feeling like an outsider a little bit. Um, then seeing the ways that um, I, I mentioned earlier, but I'll mention again that when my parents divorced when I was 8, I was the only one that went with my mom, and my siblings stayed with my dad. Well, my mom was an artist as well, and she does studio paint, so like 2D, real proper artistry. And since we divorced, we had to move in with my grandparents. It was a horrible situation because while my family is lovely, my other aunt, who also was getting separated from her alcoholic husband, lived there with her 6 kids. And so it was a household of grandparents, 6 other kids, an aunt, my mom, and me, and like a million dogs. Oh God, it was horrible. I think there's only 2 dogs, but it felt like a million to me. And I quite literally lived in the dining room because there's just not enough space in the house. This was in El Paso, Texas. And I started to see as a young child how socializing women to not earn their own money, to not be able to care for themselves, to rely on men for temporal needs. So like and then having children, having maybe more children than they would otherwise have on their own, with their own decision making. I don't know. Seeing all of this was always sort of abstract until I saw my mom not be able to take care of me, and she just had me. And she was an incredible artist, but like, in El Paso, Texas, no one gives a damn about your beautiful artistry. And so she had to think about, what can I do to make money for myself? And so she actually went back to school again, became a nurse. And so this is all convoluted, but basically I witnessed my mom have to go through everything to be able to take care of herself. And I was able to see from a young age how the way we were raised and what we are taught to value put her in that position to where she didn't have any other options. And it was really hard. And we had to live in my grandparents' house through all the years that she went through nursing school. And it was really rough on me. I love those cousins, but the older ones were really mean to me and made me feel unwelcome. And it's because they were going through their own thing. And I know that as an adult, but it didn't change the fact that they hurt me. And then my mom finally earns her degree. We go, and my mom bought a house like that day. She basically bought a house showing her job offer letter. She didn't even have money yet. That probably would not happen now. And then we got our own house, and it was magical. And I watched my mom build that house from scratch. I would watch her mow, and we had this big cement, like weird ass thing in the backyard, and she hated it. And instead of just like hating it and letting it stay there, she went out with a sledgehammer and just like destroyed it and like hauled the cement chunks out of the yard. And watching her do that, I was able to see, as I grew up, to almost watch my mom grow up and go from this really, she always was very vivacious, but this stay-at-home mom, which she didn't seem always happy with, to a nurse supporting herself, buying her own house, taking care of shit herself. And I could see her level of happiness and satisfaction with life, like through that arc. And that's totally what made me who I am. And she gets very sad when she thinks about me having left the church. And in a funny way, unfortunately for her, she's the one who gave me enough strength to do it, because I saw her make the best choices she could with the tools she was given. And that made me a stronger person witnessing that. And it made me able to have the strength to say, it doesn't matter what I've known. It doesn't matter, that this has been my life, my entire life, and all the lives that came before me that led to my life. It doesn't matter, because I have to be strong enough to change it for the sake of my daughter. And so I think watching her made me who I am, even though she's very sad with who I am sometimes. But yeah, and then now the church weirdly gave me the strength to leave the church too, because I was able to tune into myself. I was taught how to tune into myself, and to listen, to the spirit, they call it, listen to the spirit, listen to your heart. And I got to the place where I was doing that so intensely that my heart told me, well, actually, this church is wrong. and it was hard. But it's funny that the church and my mom, who both would consider my life now maybe not what they would have picked, is actually what gave me the strength to pick a life that I feel is more right and just and more sort of oriented towards justice than the church is.
So talking about the privileges and responsibilities of Sisters film that you created, I kind of wanted to ask you, how did you feel when you first decided to share it, especially since you were like the leader of that youth women's group? And did you have a fear of backlash when you did decide to share it?
Yeah. So when I chose to share the privileges and responsibilities of Sisters, I remember it was on a Sunday. I finished it on a Saturday in the middle of the night, and I released it on a Sunday, and then I went to church, which is kind of ridiculous to think about now. And people saw, I shared it, I just made it, and then I shared it on, I think, Facebook. And then people were sharing it and sharing it and sharing it. And then someone shared it to the ex-Mormon Reddit subreddit. There's an ex-Mormon Reddit feed, whatever they're called, and someone shared it there, and that's when it went from 100 views to 12,000 views in like a couple of days. And I remember thinking like, ooh, ex-Mormon, like, but I'm Mormon, and it's just a commentary, like it's not an ex-Mormon thing. And which is so dumb, like thinking now, but again, like when you're in the mood of creativity, like you almost aren't seeing it clearly. And I started getting backlash where people said I made the men say different things or something like that. And so luckily, this is where pre-production, it'll be my teacher hat, is pre-production really matters, people. Because in pre-production, I had saved all of the speeches and time coded everything. And so I was able to release very quickly a PDF of all the speeches that are featured in there, and the link to the talk where they say what I wrote and or what I edited. And so there was no refuting the piece. It just stood on its own because I'm not critiquing them through my words. I'm just showing their words for what they really are. And people can't deal with it. And I will be honest that when I watch it now, I remember hearing some of these talks when I was a member of the church, and like they just didn't strike me bad at the time. And I realize it's because when you're in that headspace, you just can't, you can't even hear it clearly because of confirmation bias. You're just assuming that these men are all spiritual and all wonderful and all fantastic. You can't even see the fact that they're telling you that they're manipulating you, they're brainwashing you, you know, you can't tell. And so I started to get comments. I was able to release that document very quickly, and there's nothing to refute after that, because all you can say is, nope, they said that, so too bad for you. And then my spouse was like, so like he was the first one that was like, so it's weird that you made this, but that you're still actively Mormon. I'm kind of confused by this. And then it sort of knocked me out of that sort of double life I was leading and realized, like, yeah, I guess it is strange that I'm actively part of this organization, that when I really accept myself and I really accept how I see the world, and I see that as right instead of rebellious or something, they don't go together. And it was my ego and my stubbornness and my desire to prove my brothers wrong that I even had stayed as long as I did, because they aren't congruous. And that's not to say that no Christian based or religious faith isn't in cahoots with progressive values. It's not to say that at all, but it is to say that the Mormon church is wildly exclusionary. And I know that lots of members in the church are trying, and I give them kudos for that. But I tried for 30 years and I couldn't do it. And I had to just be like, I can't change it. I have to just accept that. And in a weird way, it was like my little serenity prayer, like to accept the things you can't change. And I finally accepted it. And with, powerful films, powerful makes it seem very grandiose. I will say critical films, when you're making films that critique something, especially large institutions, you have to prepare yourself for backlash, for people to get angry at you, for people to say that you're advancing an agenda that they don't believe in or whatever. And so when you make work like this, to me, the best thing you can do is to point to your sources and to treat it very journalistically. That's not a word. But if you point to the sources that you used, people can refute facts all day long. But at the end of the day, if you're able to show a fact is a fact is a fact, there's nothing that ultimately people can say to that. And you can interpret facts however you want, but a fact is a fact is a fact. And that is the really amazing power of video, because when you have a video and the image is matching the sound, la, 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 you can't say that didn't happen. And, while it actually makes me think a lot about what's happening in the world today, because it's not like police brutality. This is a leap, but you'll see where I'm going. It's not like police brutality all of a sudden started. It's that we were able to video it. And this is why video is so important, and why having these tools with us is so important, because we can say, no, this happened. Like, you can't pretend that it's not happening anymore. And so with social justice, whether that's, something small potatoes like religion, or huge potatoes like police brutality, that the power of video and documentary film and journalism and all of that is such that you can't tell us that this isn't true anymore. You know, with my film that I made, you can't say they didn't say that, because here it is on video. They said it. Now you can say you're not mad about it, but you can't say it didn't happen. And that's what I think is really key to social justice movements right now, is you can't pretend it didn't happen anymore, because here it is. Yeah, so obviously I care a lot about film.
What would you feel like is the biggest lesson in life that you've learned up to this point?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned is, oh my gosh, this is too cliche, but it's just true, to trust in yourself. Like, there's so many people and institutions and companies and commercials and films and all kinds of things that are trying to tell you who to be and what to believe and how the world is and this and that and the other. And it's just not so. And there's always motives. There's always things that will come and try to derail you. And over my life, the only time that I truly, truly felt that I was where I need to be is when I listened to myself and I listened to my heart. And it's almost like putting yourself in like a, you know, refrigerator box for a minute. You just like pull this huge refrigerator box over yourself and you're just like, okay, like everyone's telling me all these things. I have all these responsibilities like coming over me, and this person's pulling me this way and this way and this way. Let me tune them all out with my handy little refrigerator box for a minute. I'm like, what do I think? What do I feel? And trusting in that piece has led me everywhere I've gone.
What is something positive that you see about the younger generations?
Oh my gosh, I can't even list. I'm so obsessed with the young generations. I'm so obsessed with you. Okay, so let me just tell you, I'm really pumped about the young generation because everything that I've seen that has been progress, um, you know, fighting for justice, organizing protests, all of it has been young people today. And I'll jump on board and like come with you. But like now I've got a kid, I've done this thing, and I got to do this shit. And like it just doesn't happen once you get to this like certain age. And like when I was young, it wasn't a thing. And I guess I could have made it a thing. But like I was an asshole and didn't, I guess. I don't know. But seeing what young people today are doing, it's like you're actually changing the world. You have the energy to do it, A, but B, you're finding a path even when there wasn't a path there. You're making a path, and that's so important. It's so important. And I think about all my little tips like trust in yourself and use your tools and no. That's just innate to so many young people. And I'm obsessed with you all because you're actually doing the things that you believe in. And you're actually changing the world by doing it. And right now, we think of, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. We think of DACA and immigration movement and protests. We think of, you know, even of police brutality of all forms. We think of all kinds of things that are finally being addressed right now. And I would say like 9 times out of 10, these protests are organized by youth, attended by youth. And that political engagement is the only way to make change within a system that is built to crush change. the system in which we live is built to just push out anyone that could jeopardize capitalism, anyone that could jeopardize power structures, anyone that could do any of that. It's just a big one of these two. Like, that's how it's built. And so seeing young people say, like, enough, enough, and really leading those of us, I mean, leading adults to jump on board and help change, even if maybe laws don't change yet, just shifting public opinion is so powerful. Um, and I have all the love in my heart for young people right now. And I thank you. I thank you for what you're doing. I support what you're doing.
Um, what is some advice that you would kind of give to the younger generations?
You know, I don't know if I have advice for younger generations because I'm so proud of what they're doing right now, for the most part. But if I really had to dig deep and come up with some sagely advice, I'm not even 40 yet, so I don't know how sagely I am. But as a midpoint older person, um, I would say that anything you can do to expand the skills that you need to advance your point of view, get them. Whether that's formal education, LinkedIn learning, YouTube, like tutorials, like whatever it is, figure out what tools you need to make your message as impactful as possible. And don't forget to study those too. You know, I think about, um, you know, the greatest speakers that have so many amazing things to say, like they also had to practice public speaking. You know, so there's all these dumb skills that are obnoxious to learn and practice. Um, but all it does is make your message more powerful. I have no advice on how to believe or how to think or how to approach the world because I'm obsessed with the youth and where you know, political beliefs tend to be in younger generations. I'm so proud of them. So the only advice I'd really have is to do what you can to make sure those beliefs and ideals are as impactful as possible, whether that's you know, honing your production skills, honing your public speaking skills, honing your writing skills, making sure you don't have typos everywhere, making sure you edit just so that no one can distract people from hearing you. It's this petty shit that happens. Like, think of the internet, right? You say this magical, really important comment, and someone's like, oh, you misspelled your, you know, things like that. They seem dumb, and they are, believe me. But if there's anything that we can do to make sure our messages are heard, it's presenting them in a way that no one can say, aha, but this and that, you aren't a professional because you did do 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 do, and you aren't a professional because blah blah blah. I hate the word professional, by the way. But you never want to put something out there that anyone can detract from. And so do what you can to be as good as you can.
Out of all the films that you have produced so far, what has been your favorite and why?
Of all the films I've produced thus far, I think my favorite is a film called Families Can Be Together Forever. And that film is the longest one I've made. I said earlier that I tend towards short pieces, but that's the longest. It's 29 minutes and 44 seconds. And it's about me leaving the church at the same time that I was having my daughter and all the pain that comes from that and all, you know, dealing with my mother who's very sad that her granddaughter won't be in the church, and just dealing with all that mishmash. And the reason that that film is my favorite is a big reason of why I feel documentary film is so powerful, is because you're able to see a change. You're able to see one character at the beginning and one totally different character at the end, because they went through all this stuff to be who they are on the other side. And that's how our lives are, you know, like as our experiences change us and we change others through our interactions with them, we're different every day. We've changed every day. And so what I really love about that film and films like it, is that you're able to really get on the inside of someone changing their mind. And changing your mind is one of the amazing human experiences that we can have. And there's so many people in this world who refuse to change their minds. And it has caused many problems in the world. And so being able to see what it looks like to go through the pain of changing your mind, I think is really powerful. I think, you know, it makes it okay for other people to change their mind. And seeing work that shows this really human side of pain and this really human side of transformation, allows us all to do the transformations that we need to be better people, you know, become less racist, become less sexist, become less elitist, become less classist, become less whatever it is. Like, it requires changing your mind. And if you're not comfortable with it, you can't. And so I feel like the more we're exposed to seeing other people change their minds, the more we're like, okay, it's fine. Like, it's fine. I can change. And I think another thing, this is totally off topic, but it makes me think about politicians being accused of flip-flopping. A flip-flop is saying one thing in one area and another thing in another area and flip-flopping between. It is not a flip-flop to think one thing when you were younger and stupider or whatever, and to learn more and now think totally differently. We should be able to learn. And unfortunately, the world in which we live punishes people for learning sometimes.
What do you think is the best way for people to like really go about changing people's minds in the world?
I mean, the best way that I know how to change people's minds is to make creative work that does it for me. I find, of course, I'm biased towards, you know, creativity and using art for transformation. Of course I am. But I really haven't found a better way to do it, because so often, you know, you can argue a point till you're blue in the face, you know, on Facebook or on CNN or Fox or whatever, and people still are going to have exactly the same viewpoint they had as when they went in, and maybe even stronger because they're pissed off. But let's say you make a beautiful film, you know, thinking of Moonlight, for instance. The film Moonlight is about a Black gay man, and his experiences. And someone watching that is going to feel much more inclined to be soft and empathetic and understanding, because they were able to see the emotion behind this experience. With, you know, journalism or Facebook, or whatever, people aren't vulnerable enough there to really show the emotion behind, you know, how things affect them, how they see the world, how this and that. But with film, or, you know, podcasts, longer form creative stuff, even like novels, you know, anything like that, people who read these things, watch these things, experience these things, sit with it, and they're not on the defense to fight back. They're just hearing this story. And when you just hear this story and it's not trying to piss you off or anything, it's just a story, because it's not so argumentative, which I love to argue, so I'm not anti-argumenting, but because it's just a story, people let it enter them more easily. You know, let me tell you a story is received a lot different than let me argue my viewpoint to you. Because when you hear one thing, you say, okay, let's hear this. Let's do this thing. And you hear the other thing and you're like, oh no, because I'm going to tell you my viewpoint. And that's just human nature. And so the power of storytelling, to me, cannot be broken from the power of change. Storytelling, no matter the form, creative storytelling is.
In terms of your creative work and your storytelling, how do you want that to impact the world in the long term, and what impact do you want to have on the world?
I think, you know, I'm not so worried about impacting the world. I think I could die happy if I knew that anything I've ever made, or anything I've ever taught, or anything I've ever said made someone realize, oh, I don't have to deal with what I've been handed. Like, I can make my own way. And as long as anything I do just shows someone that they too can carve out their own path, like, I'm good. I wouldn't have to make another thing, do another thing. I could just go pass out on that bed.